very broad subject. Okay, so it's much less focused, and we're going to be hitting a lot of different ideas in your demos, talking about light, talking about sound, talking about mechanical energy, potential energy, kinetic energy. So there's a whole lot of ideas, and come on in. There's a whole lot of ideas here, so I'm sure you'll have lots of questions that you're going to be talking to us about. So let's start talking about energy. Energy is one of the most important kind of concepts in all of science. Okay? This is a physical science program that you're involved in, but energy, of course, is important in all of the sciences, biological sciences, earth sciences, chemistry, physics, engineering. But what is energy? I'm going to start asking you questions. I'm going to get interaction. What is energy?
Sixth grade textbook says it's
An ability to do work. Okay, so we know what my next question is.
what's work?
Yeah.
Force times distance.
All right. Now, I'd be surprised if everybody was familiar with that. Work. Let's just. That's a good thing. You brought it up, not me. Force times distance. So that's a good rule of thumb. If the energy of a system is changed, okay, when something applies a force and moves it, okay, that's one way of thinking about it. For example, if I take this pen and I'm applying a force to pull it up higher, correct? Have I changed its energy?
Yes.
All right, I'm getting yeses and nos. Well, in what sense have I changed? Before we get to this, let's get back to this example in a second. Let's talk more about energy. So one concept, or one way of thinking about what energy is the ability to do work. And that sounds simple, but you want to think about it. Over the course of your day, I want you to think about what exactly that means. Because you know that energy comes in a lot of different forms. Let's talk about that. So what forms, let's mention, I want you to tell me what forms of energy. There's not just one type of energy. What are the basic, the most general types of energy? Potential. All right. Potential and kinetic. So I'm gonna just because I'm gonna make things complicated, I'm gonna use other words that I think are helpful, but we're gonna use both words. Stored potential energy is simply stored energy, right? Isn't that what that? So well, let's talk about that. What is potential energy? I like that. Energy what?
It's waiting to be used.
That's waiting to be used. That can be potentially used. That's why we use the word potential. And the reason I'm using the word active energy is I want you to think of kinetic energy as energy that is being used. Okay? And I'll talk a little bit why there's a lot of different forms of active or kinetic energy that we can talk. There's actually lots of different forms of stored energy, potential energy, and lots of different forms of kinetic energy or active energy. So, well, before I get into that, let's talk about what are some different types of stored energy. Give me an example of stored energy.
The rubber band.
Ryan's rubber band. Rubber band. So, potential energy or stored energy. If I do this, do I have some stored energy? Okay. What kind of energy is it? I mean, it's potential energy, but specifically, can we come up with a name for that particular kind?
Elastic.
Great. I love it. Elastic. Okay, it's elastic or spring. Springs, rubber bands, they can store something that we should call, I think, elastic potential energy. Beautiful way of putting it. That's exactly right. What other kinds of potential energy do we have?
Gravitational.
Right. Okay. Gravitational potential energy. If I have this pen up here, it has gravitational potential energy. It's a fancy way of saying, something's up higher and it can move. Gravity can pull it down lower. Okay. gravitational, elastic. What are some other types of energy? Other types of potential energy? Magnetic, yeah, we can talk about magnetic potential energy. That is, you have, explain that to me. How would you have magnetic potential energy?
We have a magnet, and so you have two magnets, and the north end, obviously in the north end next, and they have the south end, and the north end is going together, and the together to feel the energy.
Yeah, absolutely. When you pull them apart, the way of thinking about potential energy is the pulling apart part, right? The more you pull them apart, the more potential energy. Okay? Magnetic. What's another one? What's a really big one that there's a really big one that you might be passing over that's really important for electrical potential energy? Absolutely.
What about what comes in the car? Like energy from fuel.
Okay, what's a general thing? What's fuel?
Chemical.
Yeah, there you go. Chemical potential energy. Great. So you can have potential energy stored. You can have energy stored. So I've got gravitational, elastic, chemical, electrostatic. There's also nuclear potential energy. And I've also got mass down here. That's kind of an advanced concept, but mass actually is a form of energy. That's what Einstein taught us 100 years ago. But mass is actually another form of energy. Okay, kinetic energy or active energy. What are some different types? This is a little smaller list, but when I say different types of active energy, what's active energy or kinetic energy? Okay, movement. So when I hit this rubber band, so I turned potential energy, turning potential energy into what? Potential energy into active or kinetic energy. So that's motion of a large object. That's kinetic energy. What other types of active energy are there?
Heat energy.
Wonderful. Heat energy is also active energy, and you can call it kinetic energy, but it's a little, in the end it is, what is heat?
Movement of particles.
It's movement of particles, so it's the same thing, really, but in another, it's also, but there's some different things, but we have to think about heat in a slightly different way than a pen flying across the room. So it is another type of active energy that really comes down to motion. What's another type of active energy? Yeah, movement of electrons, right? So yeah, that's true. Actually, that's great. So movement of current through wires is another form of active energy. Again, it is movement of objects, but very tiny objects.
I have a question.
Yep.
Because I teach this.
Yeah, absolutely.
So can something have potential thermal energy, or is thermal energy kind of defined as movement? Something has to give an object thermal energy, like it has to get it from somewhere. So therefore, the particles don't necessarily have it in them; they have to get it from somewhere else.
Potential thermal energy. So are you asking if you have thermal energy, is that a kind of potential energy? Or are you saying...
Can something have potential thermal energy, or is thermal energy defined as
Here's the
kind
way
of kinetic energy?
The way it is a type. It's a type of active energy.
Yeah.
Any kind of stored energy could become thermal energy,
Right.
but it could also become other types of energy. It could become...
This is my question, because I teach this, and whether something can have, whether for each of the forms of energy or whatever, whether there is potential and kinetic energy for each of those, but that's not what it's like. Can something have potential,
Yeah, that's a good question. I think active energy or kinetic energy is more generic.
kind of kinetic energy?
It's just movement of particles, whereas the potential energies are more specific. There's different types of potential energy. There's different ways to store potential energy.
But the way that she's talking about it kind of makes me think, like, if I look at elastic potential energy, it would tend to be more kinetic and movement in nature when it does become used, whereas chemical energy would probably become more thermal energy as well as movement energy, depending on what you're talking about. So it's like, depends on the type of stored energy will depend on the product that you see as well as how you describe it, like that.
Does that kind of get at your question at all? I mean, here, let me put it this way. So chemical potential energy, if you release chemical potential energy, you blow up it's a kind of a violent examples are a bomb, okay? You're creating motion and heat.
Right.
I'm actually doing the same thing right here. There actually is heat also being created. So that potential energy is, in both cases, in both the bomb and in this rubber band, the potential energy is going into both objects and streaming away, and heat. What else, though? Well, glad we brought this up. There's another form of energy we haven't described. That's sound. Okay? So sound energy, in the end, is really not a different thing than kinetic energy, but it's a specific form. It's motion. What is sound?
It's like particles in a wave.
Yeah, it's a wave moving through the air, and it's also, so you can create, if you release potential energy, part of that energy can be going into sound, which is another form of active energy. Yes?
You know, I know you're using the as an example. How about the human as an example, as a lot of energy that carries all the different forms of energy? The reason I'm saying that, because as we go through the curriculum, they're also studying human body system.
Absolutely.
So, if you look at the human being, how many different forms of energy we carry with us.
Absolutely.
Sound energy, it's electrical, the neurons, it's as they travel. We are
And lots of chemical.
We are built up with an electrical system.
Absolutely. No, the body, so all of these subjects can be applied to biology.
Right.
And in your, the energy, the stored, well, what's a good question? What is the stored energy? What's the form of stored energy in your body?
Caloric energy.
Yeah, it's food, and ultimately, I mean, it's chemical energy, right? You have molecules that are storing energy that are released. Okay, I'm going to get carried away. This is a great conversation. We got lots of stuff to do today. But there's one more form of energy we haven't talked about. Like the most obvious, well, maybe not the most obvious one, but there's a very important. On a day like today, there's a form of energy that we should be. Right. We've got this other, and this is some ways. This is why I make this distinction between active and kinetic, because all the types of kinetic energy or active energy we talked about so far have to do with matter moving around. Right. It has to do with stuff moving. Right. This is a little bit different type of active energy. Light, radiation, is a form of active energy, and you can call it kinetic energy, but it's really, I think that can be confusing. It's a type of, radiation is its own type of active energy, okay? And when I say radiation, what are the different forms of radiation? All right, microwaves, what else? I mean, what is it that we're seeing out here? This is
Visible light.
what we call visible light, right? You cook your food. Sometimes you cook your food with what kind of radiation? Microwaves. It's a type of radiation. So we've got X-rays. There you go. Infrared. You guys got it. So this is another form of active energy, and I think it's important to recognize. It's important to recognize the slight difference, because when you have potential energy, typically it's going to get converted into a whole bunch of different types of active energy. Sometimes all the ones we've described. You're going to have objects moving. You're going to have heat. You're going to have sound. You're going to have light. Okay? Okay. So let's talk about this.